Hi and welcome to the CIPD Central London interview that we do in preparation for our big events that we've got running. And we've got a really brilliant event that's coming up on the 8th of February, and it's called Team Coaching, How to Help Your Team Triumph. So we run a regular series of events to support HR professionals, to support their organisations. And one of the really big topics that comes up consistently is about team coaching. And what we want to do is basically, we're running an event and we want to just unveil a little bit the mystery behind team coaching. What is it? How does it work? When is the right time to use it with your organization and your teams as well? And how can you either do it yourself or even commission the work too as well? So we had to think, who could we invite to actually be our guest and expert for the session in February? I was very fortunate that Dr. Declan Woods agreed to be our guest. So Dr. Declan Woods actually wrote the standard on team coaching as well. So just a little bit of a background. So Declan's got a brilliant amount of experience. He runs his own team coaching business called teamGenie. He's a published author with the book around team coaching. He's a professor of leadership practice at King's College. He's even been a decorated officer in the army around leadership too, and also has a whole range of qualifications from an MBA, and he's also a registered psychologist as well. So this whole range of experience really allows him to talk about team coaching in a really informed way. So what we're going to do in the next 25 minutes or so is to just do a bit of an introduction to team coaching and really sort of whet your appetite for the session. And if you can't make it, the tickets are selling really quickly at the moment. We've already sold 100 tickets and we're still about 4 or 5 months out from the event. So if you can't, then this event will give you loads of signposts to get you started. And if you read the show notes in the description on YouTube, you'll find a link to Declan's book and to further details around team coaching as well. So welcome, Declan. Thank you so much agreeing to run the event for us and also to be our interviewee today.
You're very welcome, and thank you for inviting me and to the London branch as well. It's great to be here with you and to share my passion really for working with teams.
Brilliant. And obviously in the build up to this, you and I have had lots of conversations. And I think for people that are joining us today, sometimes definition is really important, isn't it? So from your perspective, what is the definition of team coaching?
Yeah, and it's only fairly recently that there's been some more agreed upon definitions. So so team coaching is still in its relative infancy, and so not surprisingly, there's been a whole range of definitions, and that's part of the confusion in this sort of field. So it's great to see some of the work that the professional coaching bodies have done on this to arrive at a bit more clarity. So a sort of working definition that I use is that it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration between a group of individuals that form part of a team. And one of the things that really makes a team is the interdependence between members. So it's the reliance that you and I might have in working together to produce some collective output. So team coaching is very much about how you work with the whole team as an intact team, as well as the individuals within it at the same time, to really help them focus on that interdependence, how they collaborate and work together to produce more than they could do as a group of individuals. So towards a common purpose and to some collective outputs. So that's really the what's at the heart of team coaching.
Fantastic. And there's a load of questions I want to ask just about that as well. But I guess one of the questions I had initially was, how did you sort of discover team coaching? You've got such a varied background and you've been exposed to lots of different, what was it that resonated for you about team coaching and how do you discover it?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think one is that I'd been a member of a team. I'd led teams of different shapes and sizes. I'd conducted some research on teams, and so I thought I knew about teams, and yet was constantly sort of confounded by them and confused by them when working with them. So it was really that sort of experience of encountering and working with teams that sort of actually led me to I want to make more sense of this and what's going on and how I might help teams. So that was very much part of this. I think as well. I think I've been involved in work developing teams in different guises over the years, and a lot of those just didn't seem to quite hit the nail on the head. And so what I love about team coaching is it takes the best of a whole number of other approaches, but it keeps the responsibility with the team for doing the work. And so I think it's more sustainable and it's more likely to lead to realistic outcomes for a team. So it's it's that, and the fact that it works is part of the appeal for me and teams, quite frankly.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love what you're saying there in terms of like sort of collective responsibility. It's not the manager's sole responsibility to look after the team. It's the team's collective responsibility. I guess one of the things you were touching on there is that there's a lot of teams out there that call themselves teams that may actually be groups. Is that something that you see quite a lot?
I do, that's right. And that's not to say that every collection of individuals needs to be a team. It's, there's some social desirability around this sort of concept of team. And so you put any group of individuals together at work and they're instantly given this label of a team. But often they're not a team, and they don't need to be a team. And so by labeling them as a team and treating them as a team, sometimes can create expectations that it's just not possible for them to meet. So I think that that's probably worth saying right at the outset that we often see teams in name only, and really they're a group of individuals, and that's okay. That's
Mm,
okay. But it's particularly where that reliance and that interdependence comes in, and we need to do more than we can do as a group of individuals, and work to really closely to do that. That's where the focus and emphasis on team comes, and also the difficulty comes in then as well.
great. And I guess there's lots of different types of teams. Obviously, you sort of said there's some common denominators, but what kind
Hmm.
of teams, like, is it purely sort of functional teams? Could it go as broad as like boards, for example, like project teams? Like, what kind of teams can actually benefit from team coaching?
Um, you might expect me to say this, but most teams can benefit from team coaching if the need is there and they're ready for it. So there's a couple of caveats with that. So and team coaching is not necessarily right, or the timing isn't right for every team. So that's part of the puzzle here, working that out. But generally, most teams can benefit from team coaching. You mentioned boards there. Boards are slightly different because there's a bit of a hedgehog, sort of prickly hedgehog effect, where on the one hand you want board members to align and come together and agree on some things, and the very notion of a board is that it's made up of members that are independent rather than interdependent. So there's this sort of slight conundrum with boards, in that you want alignment and them to pull together, but only so much, so that you don't lose that sort of independence and that sort of challenge, which is a key part of their sort of governance role. So having said that, boards can also benefit from this, but there's a slightly different approach with them.
Brilliant. So we kind of covered like who can have it, and so I guess what do you feel are some of the times where team coaching can be required? So if I was a manager, if I was looking at my team, or if I was an HR practitioner, I was looking at some of the teams that I'm supporting, what would be some of the symptoms or clues that would be showing there might be some need for team coaching support?
Mm. Yeah, and it's these sort of topics that we want to get into on the main webinar itself. So there are some fairly classic clues and cues, and also some more emerging ones as well that have arisen during and post COVID-19 lockdown. Some of these are to do with the context, and some of these are to do with the team itself. So let me give you one or two examples. So if there is significant change and transformation going on on an organization, I mean, teams are a very classical way of organizing people and work in organizations. And so if the organization changes, then often what follows is that the team changes. It changes in structure, teams merge, they demerge, people leave, new people join. So it's that sort of interplay of all of those things that often is a set of circumstances when a team can benefit from some sort of help. Another classic sign is if there's a change in team leader. And either a new team inherited an existing team, or some changes there. So again, some common clues. What we're seeing more recently, sort of, is the transition from in-person on-site work to virtual work out of necessity during lockdown, to a more hybrid approach. And teams are still grappling with that now, and how to make that work in practice. And so that's some very practical work about how they might do that. So there's a whole bunch of things, and part of what we'll be talking about on the webinar is as an HR professional, what's your role in this? What is it that you can look out for? Because often you're the first port of call. You're the professional working most closely with the team. Often you're asked, and actually, what are the clues and cues, and what are they telling you, and what sense do you make of them? And actually, is this pointing towards team coaching, or is it pointing towards something else? So there's something here about knowing what to look for, and then being able to translate that into, is team coaching the thing, or does the team need something else? As then and then about well, what does it look like in practice? What is a program of team coaching, so that I can be clear in articulating this to the team, and what commitment is required by the team to make this a success. So all of that is right in the heart of the HR professionals role. So they have a critical part to play in this, in the success of it.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, isn't it? And I guess there's almost an assumption in organizations that if we put people into teams, people know what to do. Do you feel that there's a space for organizations to train people on how to be in a team and how to participate in it?
Yes, I do, including team leaders, because often we're just thrown together into a team, and there's an assumption that we'll know how to work well together, and that's not always the case. And I mean, if that were the case, then the majority of teams would be effective, and yet multiple research studies show that the vast majority of teams, so more than 9 out of 10 teams, are just ineffective. So they underwhelm, they underperform, and that's incredibly sad. So it needn't be that way. And part of that is about knowing how to operate in a team. So what we often find is, and this is part of my journey into working with teams, is that what we were finding is that we were getting lots of calls from team leaders that were describing things that were going on in the team, and typically what they'd be describing would be more symptoms rather than causal factors. And so what they were doing, and often had done before we got the call to work with them, is they'd focused on the symptoms. So they might focus on how somebody behaves, or how people behave towards each other in a team. Well, that's really understandable, but that may not be a real where the work really needs to focus. So there's a bit of slipperiness with this, with teams, and so grabbing hold of them and making sense of it, and being clear about what's the work, and where to focus for best effect is all part of this. So that's all the sort of stuff that we'll talk about on the session in February. I really want to make it very sort of practical, to share some experience, but also to engage everybody in a sort of conversation about this. So what I'm hoping is that this is teams are complex, they're messy, and a part of this work is about making sense of them. And so I'm hoping that in February we can make more sense of them together, so that what you come away with from the session is actually a bit more clarity, and I know what my role is in this now, and what I might do about it to sort of progress this. So yeah,
Wow,
that's all part of it.
so many interesting things. I love what you're saying in terms of the messiness, isn't it? Because it is messy, because it's human beings, and as soon as you feel that the team is getting to a good place, then things just happen. You'll have a change in personnel, or something will happen in the organizational context as well. So I guess it's people sort of managing their expectations, isn't it, in terms of what's possible with teams too. I guess the other thing you were just making there is the fact that there's almost an expectation upon team leaders to know how to run a team. And yeah, in many organizations, they promote subject matter experts, or people that are most competent
Yeah.
into leadership positions. What kind of things could a new team leader think about in terms of what the most important things they need to get right in their team to give it the best
Yeah.
chance?
Yeah. Well, I think before I answer that question, let me say that my starting point is that all teams need leadership. And that needn't necessarily come from the nominated leader, as long as the team finds a way of gathering the leadership that it needs at that point. So it could come from within the team, and that's absolutely fine. But I think the leadership is needed by teams, and that what exactly is needed changes as teams change. So just when you think you've got it, things move on a bit. So I think this is all part of the artistry, and really it was a desire to really recognize the challenges that presents team leaders and a desire to help them with that led me to writing this book, on which this sort of session is partly based. So, how to help your team triumph. So this is really a self-help guide for team leaders who really should be able to look at the book, recognize themselves in it and what they're grappling with, and then find something useful. But I guess to answer your question, I'm a firm believer in doing the basics and doing the basics well. So being clear about have you got a team? Or is it not a team? And either answer is fine. But if it is a team, then why does it exist? What's it there for? What's its purpose? What do stakeholders require of the team? And a lot of work, even before team coaching starts, has this team been set up for success? And a lot of teams aren't. They're just thrown together without a great deal of thought, and yet with high expectations, as you've talked about. And so, um, going back to basics and thinking, okay, have I laid the foundations so that my team stands a chance of being successful? So things like, who's on the team, who's not on the team? Have we agreed how we'll work together? What's acceptable behavior or not in a team? What are we driving towards, and what are we here to achieve together? And what's your part in that, and what's my part, and how do we work together on that? So there are some really quite fundamental things here that I think I would encourage a team lead to really focus on and put in place first. There's always, and I say that because there's always lots of things that you could focus on with a team, but teams are busy. They've got lots to do. They've got a day job of delivering stuff, and so focusing on the basics and the basics well can often be enough. So that would be my encouragement, is to be clear about what does your team need right now, and what are the basics that need to be put in place, and then
Mm.
think of those as a set of foundations on which to build.
Yeah, that it's like you're saying, it's the setup that's often missed, isn't it? And we live in such an action orientated world, don't we? And our organizations and our managers and our teams are so task focused. It's almost like I'm getting the sense that team coaching is about creating a space to slow things down and to define and fix the fundamentals so the team can move on. Is that right, or is it even more than that?
It certainly includes all that,
Mm.
and at a time when it can be tempting to speed things up, and because the team is under pressure to speed up and get to and deliver results more quickly. But often the sort of mantra that I use is slow down to speed up, slow down, get the basics in place, work this out, and then speed things up a bit. So yeah, that's all part of it.
Okay, now I have one question out of professional curiosity today. I'm dying to ask.
Go for
Um,
it.
is obviously we hear about the Tuckman model a lot, the forming, norming, storming, performing, and it is a mental model that a lot of sort of managers have in terms of understanding where they are. Is that something that you see that teams do go through, or is it like a bit of a myth that's sort of developed its own kind of life? Is that something that you see as a sort of stages in a team's life cycle?
Yeah, so I think my answer is yes, and so I mean, so bearing in
Yeah.
mind that Tuckman and Jensen's work was carried out on researching teams in the 1960s, and so that's decades ago, and so how organisations think about and use teams has changed a lot since then. Having said that, it's one of the most enduring models of team development that exists, and so it has some real currency even now with teams, and so I think that can create a sort of an entry point, an opening to do some useful work. Um, I think to answer your sort of professional curiosity. All teams go through different stages of development as a team in some way, but they don't necessarily go through all of the stages in the same way at the same speed. So there's something in it, and it's not quite as simple and linear as the research from the 1960s sort of suggests. So, and that's part of the messiness. And so teams can often be in different team members can be in different stages and different phases of maturity at any one time, which means their needs are different, and therefore it adds to the complexity about how we respond to those needs. So a team is both one thing, and it's a multitude of things at the same time. And so this is all part of the what's going on in this team right now, and what does it actually need, and what's going to be the most useful thing for it. And so that's all part of it. So that was a long-winded answer to say that I think there's still some currency in this. There are different maturity models of team and team effectiveness, and I've created a more contemporary one that reflects how prevailing organisations sort of mature and develop, and what happens, including what happens when they do a great job. Often they get more work, and so forth. And so that's that sort of theoretical underpinning is part of our thinking and part of our approach.
I love it. Yeah, no, thank you so much. It very much, sometimes the tendency is to oversimplify things, isn't it? Whereas really, like, there is so much complexity as well. It was really interesting to hear about your
Mm.
background, where you've actually you created the industry standard for team coaching for the Association for Coaching, and obviously that's a pioneering thing in terms of setting the standard. What was that process like, and what did you discover about team coaching as you did that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big question. So let me try and keep it. Let me try and keep it quite succinct. I mean, the first thing is that we wanted to create some clarity to demystify the complexity and the confusion that existed. So how does team coaching differ from facilitation and team building, and is it old wine in new bottles, or is it something genuinely new? So um, and how do we create a standard that had some relevance globally? And so we deliberately interviewed practitioners, not necessarily those that only identified as a team coach, but those that identified as doing different forms of work with teams and group. And so we interviewed them, we lifted the lid on their practice, and we asked them to describe their practice. And what we were interested in is what was it that they were doing with teams. And then we had a look at that, and what we saw was that there were some quite distinct regional differences, which is fascinating. So how do you codify what good looks like when there's such a range of different sort of practices with a variety of different teams across different geographies? Well, that was all part of it. And so this was um, what started as what seemed to be quite a straightforward bit of work actually ended up in a piece of work that lasted sort of 3.5 years. And I guess by the time we get to the February session, I'll have published a paper on the sort of journey with that. But it was about inviting practitioners to sort of articulate their sort of practice and their work, and then sifting and sorting and trying to sort of codify that, and then stress test it, and then prod it and poke it and have a look at it again. So it was all of that sort of stuff.
So interesting is that there's differences in cultures as well. Was there a vast difference between cultures in countries?
I mean, there is a sort of classic one between East and West, and particularly around the notion of challenge, but also some quite differing practices between the maturity of team coaching, even in, say, Western Europe. Some countries, it was still almost unheard of, and yet other markets, including the UK, it was far more prevalent. But I think the part of what we wanted to do is recognize that this body of work is still in its infancy and is likely to change over time with our understanding of it. And so what we wanted to do was not miss the opportunity to bring some clarity to it, in a way that would help organizations and help teams, as well as help inform the development and accreditation of coaches, but also keep it sufficiently future-proof that it would reflect changes over time. So how do we do all of those things at the same time?
I can't wait to read that paper. It sounds absolutely fascinating, and it's amazing to be doing real pioneering work, isn't it? Sort of setting the standard as well. Obviously, there's a lot of things I want to talk about, but obviously, we've only got a short time together. But I
Mm.
guess one of the things that you often sort of think about with teams, and is an innate part of teams, is conflict. When is conflict something you sort of see as sort of that's baked into team life, and is that something that team coaching directly sort of works on within teams?
So yes and yes. I think where you've got teams, you've got conflict, and often practitioners, including HR professionals, approach this idea of conflict as a bad thing. Whereas actually both the research and practice point very clearly to conflict being a necessary enabler of performance within a team. So you can sort of think of it almost as a sort of source of energy, and it's a question of um, the direction of that and the focus of that and how much of it is what's really important here. So whether the conflict is focused on the work that the team is doing and how the team goes about its work, or whether it's focused on individuals. So if it's on the former, that's generally less problematic. If it's focused on the individuals, then that can lead to more dysfunction within a team. So I think reframing this as something that can be additive and useful for a team, and resist the temptation either to get triggered by our anxiety with it, and sweep it under the carpet, put the lid on it, and hope that it will go away, because generally it doesn't, is all part of this work. And I guess I think part of our role is to hold a team until it acquires the ability and skills to be able to name and work through it itself. So, and approaches to this differ, but I think I talked earlier about keeping the responsibility with the team. Well, I think that includes working through conflict, and generally my experience is that when teams do that, they often find that not only do they come out at a better place, but also it wasn't quite as bad as they perhaps imagined in the first place. And actually, we're still here, and we're still talking, and we're still able to work together. And actually, that wasn't quite as bad as I'd imagined. So actually, can we have that conversation again? Yes, we can. And is it a bit easier next time? Well, it probably is. So yes, I think I think putting it on the table and then working through it is very much part of this work.
Brilliant.
Having said that, I think with any of this type of work in its infancy, it's often it can be tempting to focus on what's not working. Whereas we know that when teams have huge potential, and when they do work, they work brilliantly well and produce some fantastic results. And so, as part of this, I would advocate sort of balance, and also thinking about what's the success formula for a team, what's leading to it delivering some great stuff, and actually how can we help the team get some more clarity on what they're doing that's contributing to their success, so that they can do more of it. So I think yes, there may be a request from the team to focus on some things that aren't working, and I think that may be important. And what's also important is to focus on what's working well, and focusing on strengths too.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think often in organizations that we're naturally deficit orientated, aren't we? So a lot of the development budgets will be sort of attributed to sort of maybe what we describe dysfunctional teams or lower performing teams. But I guess what you're saying there is that even the highest performing teams benefit from team coaching because it kind of optimizes their practices. Yeah, brilliant. I guess the event's coming up on February the 8th, and it's at 6 o'clock. It's going to be a really interactive event. Obviously, from what Declan's been sharing with us today, there's going to be a whole wealth of different things to share. Will people have an opportunity to ask questions in the session about their own particular teams and situation as well?
Definitely. I'll try and contain the input, and my style is very interactive. So I'll encourage people, rather than sitting on questions, to ask them as we go along, because I think you'll get more value from it that way. So my encouragement is to think about teams you're working with or teams that you're supporting and what they might need, and think about the questions that you might have, and bring them along to the session, yeah, let's talk about it.
Brilliant. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. It sounds like it's the really perfect blend between, really sort of cutting edge research and theory and real practice and pragmatism as well in the workplace. So the event is going to be available on CIPD Central London on our Eventbrite page. You can find the link in the comments. Declan, I know we're really looking forward to having you there, and thank you so much for giving all the time. We really appreciate the time that you're giving and the preparation that you're giving to this session as well. And I want to say thank you on behalf of all the CIPD members. Tickets are free if you're a CIPD member, and there will be a small number of non-member tickets available as well. But once the tickets are gone, they're gone. There will be potentially an opportunity to watch the event afterwards on the CIPD London YouTube channel, but we'd love to see you there if you can make it. So thank you so much, Declan. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, and look forward to seeing everybody in February.